of Palestinian land, to support it as a ethnically pure racist state which discriminates against the large minority of Arab Israeli citizens, much as Mississippi discriminated against black people under Jim Crow. It also supports the expansionist policies of Israel as a military state. And there is virtually nothing that Israel can do that the Christian Zionists are not willing to support. In fact, they are more Zionist than the Zionists. Pat Robertson, probably one of the most prominent televangelists and a Christian Zionist, actually suggested the General and the later Prime Minister Ariel Sharon was stricken with a terminal coma because he defied God by evacuating a number of Jewish settlements from Gaza. So the first element in Christian Zionism, and what gives it the name Christian Zionism, is its unqualified support for Israel.
Which they get from the pro-Israel Jewish lobby, AIPAC. So if they want a war in Iran, then they're going to mobilize Christians.
It is time for America to consider a military preemptive strike against Iran to prevent a nuclear holocaust in Israel and a nuclear attack in America.
So, and they're also organizing regionally, and then they have their national convention. So it's a growing and a powerful movement.
Virtually every major televangelist on Trinity Broadcasting Network or other media is a Christian Zionist and buys into this ideology. It is a billion-dollar industry. The total audience, viewer audience, reading audience of media controlled by Christian Zionists is estimated to be larger than the total readership of Time, Newsweek, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and the New York Times combined.
The greatest potential of pro-Israel voters will be among fundamentalist Christians. And it's an element in America that's growing. And the Israeli lobby sees that, hey, that represents a larger number. And it's also a natural base of automatic support for the issues we want.
Now, ironically, despite the large number of people who believe in the rapture, some 39% of Americans, for instance, believe that when the Bible refers to the end of the earth occurring through fire, this means nuclear war. And some 70 million people believe in the rapture. Americans, incidentally, this is almost exclusively an American ideology, 100% made in America. They believe, despite the large number of people who believe this, you will find that very few of the rank-and-file Christians who believe in elements of dispensationalism have even heard of the term, much less understand the underlying philosophy and the methodology behind it.
The idea of the rapture, I do not believe it's a biblical doctrine. Hagee preaches, but Darby took 1 Thessalonians 4 and made it into a literal historical event. So where it talks about Jesus coming into the clouds and the believers, I believe that is symbolic language, not an actual historical event. But when you look at where it takes you, it forces Jesus into a double second coming. Jesus has to come in the clouds to remove the church, then Jesus has to come back again. That's not biblical.
Christian fundamentalists believe that the Bible and its prophecies are in fact a playbook for the present. In other words, the prophets of the Bible, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Isaiah, were not simply social critics at the time, warning the Israelites of their evil ways in order to attempt to correct them, as all traditional Bible scholars see it. but that somehow those prophecies fell into a 2,000-year-old time warp, and we're simply waiting for Pat Robertson and John Hagee and Jerry Falwell to come onto the scene and apply those prophecies to current day events and the eventual and imminent end of the world.
So they are a force, and for me as an evangelical, and for many of us, they do not represent the gospel. It's a distortion, and it really undermines, I think, a just peace in the Holy Land, and they have no concern, not an ounce of compassion for Palestinian Christians who are really suffering, losing land, and being driven out.
Now, wouldn't one expect that the Zionist movement in the United States would be opposed to Christian Zionism, both because of the fate that it dictates for the Jewish people, but also because of its ideology, which traditionally, going back to Darby, has believed and put forward unequivocally that God created Christians and Jews to take different paths through their history. The Jews were to take an earthly path, and the Christians were to take a heavenly path. And Jews were never to be allowed to go to heaven unless they converted to Christianity. Obviously, the Zionist establishment in the United States is perfectly aware of the anti-Semitic content of Christian Zionist ideology. But going back as far as the late 1970s, when the State of Israel reportedly gave Jerry Falwell his personal Lear jet, the Zionist establishment has realized the value of Christian Zionism despite the essential anti-Semitism of its ideology. To Jewish Zionists, the Christian Zionists are useful idiots. For the end-timer Christian Zionists, the Jews are sacrificial lambs.